Hi everyone, welcome back to Python Code Nemesis. Today we'll be going through Python time manipulation with FreezeGun. So there's a lot of times when we are testing code and we need to test it based on some time-based parameters like system time, from time, to time, effective time, and similar time-based parameters. In that case, some of these APIs, let's say, that we want to test, have a certain mechanism where they pick up the exact time that they test in the present moment. So you can't really pass it a time in case you want to test it. Yep, you can mock it, but that is probably not a very good idea when you're doing an integration test and you want everything to be based on a certain time. So that is where FreezeGun helps you. So let's say if it is the 27th of July today, 2023, and you want to use a date in, let's say, the future or the past, let's say 31st of July, what will you do? That's where FreezeGun comes in. You can just freeze the time at this time and like a specific date, time, and even seconds. So once you do that, your test will run in that time. So that will be the present time for that. So you can have like several API calls at different times in case you wanted to simulate a real world scenario where something gets called first and then next something else gets called, and then based on these two API calls, a third event starts happening on a separate day. So yeah, let's get started. Introduction. Python provides a range of modules to work with dates, times, and timestamps. One of the most common tasks when working with time is manipulating the current time to simulate a future or past time for testing purposes. FreezeGun is a third-party Python library that simplifies time manipulation by allowing developers to freeze and specify a specific time for their tests. In this article, we will explore using FreezeGun to manipulate in Python. What are the topics that we learn in this video? What is FreezeGun? Installation and setup, basic usage and freezing time, manipulating time for testing purposes, freezing time in tests using PyTest, time zone handling, test your Flask endpoint with FreezeGun, write an integration test with FreezeGun, best practices for using FreezeGun. So FreezeGun is a Python library that allows you to manipulate the system clock in your tests. It can be used to simulate different points in time for testing purposes, making it easier to write time-sensitive code. In this article, we will explore how to use FreezeGun and the best practices to follow. Installation and setup. To install FreezeGun, you can use pip install FreezeGun. Once you have installed FreezeGun, you can import it into your Python code. From FreezeGun, import freeze time. Basic usage and freezing time. FreezeGun allows you to freeze the system clock to a specific date and time. To do this, you use the freeze time decorator. So from FreezeGun, import freeze time, import date time, freeze time 2022-301, test something. So is that datetime.datetime.now is equal to datetime.datetime.2022-31. In this example, we use freezing the clock to March 1st, 2022, then checking if the datetime now returns the expected value. Manipulating time for testing purposes. FreezeGun also allows you to manipulate the system clock for testing purposes. This can be useful when you need to test code that depends on current time. For example, let's say you have a function that returns the current year. Get current year datetime.datetime.now.year. To test this function using FreezeGun, you can use the datetime.time delta class to manipulate the current time. So freeze the time at 1st March 2022, and there is this function get current year. So there's the test get current year, assert get current year equal to 2022. And if you freeze it to a different date, on the same year, that is the last day of the year, the get current year function should still return 2022. You can also put in a bunch of more tests like adding freezing time on different years like 2020, 2023 and checking if this is working correctly. Freezing time in tests with PyTest. FreezeGun can also be used with PyTest, a popular Python testing framework. To use FreezeGun with PyTest, you can install the PyTest FreezeGun plugin. Once you have installed the plugin, you can use freeze time fixture to freeze the persistent clock. To have test something, freeze time of 2022-3-1 as a datetime.datetime.now equal to datetime.datetime of 1st March 2022. Time zone handling. FreezeGun also supports time zone handling. You can specify the time zone using the TZ offset parameter. From FreezeGun, import freeze time, import datetime, freeze time on 1st March 2022 and TZ offset is +5. So datetime.datetime.now.strf time is equal to UTC +5. So we're just checking that the time zone was correctly handled and that the time zone of this current frozen time is UTC +5, which is here. So you can execute this to make sure that this is working correctly. Post and query data at a specific time from Flask API. Here's an example of how to use FreezeGun to schedule posts to a Flask endpoint at different times and then query the data from a database. From Flask, import Flask, JSONify, import freeze, from FreezeGun, import freeze time, import datetime, import SQLite. So connect to the database with SQLite.3.connect, example.db, C equal to connection.cursor, create a table to store the posts, C.execute, create table if not exists, posts, ID integer, primary key, auto increment, payload text, created at timestamp, connection.commit, define a function to insert a post into a database, def insert post, which takes in a payload, now equal to datetime.now, C.execute, insert into posts, payload, comma created at, with the values, payload, comma now, connection.commit, define a route to accept post requests and insert the payload into the database, app.route/post, which takes in a payload, request.json payload, insert post of payload, and returns the message, post created successfully. Also define a route to query the posts from the database. So the /posts endpoint has methods get. So with app.appContext, C.execute, select star from posts, rows equal to C.fetch all, result equal to a JSON, like for row and rows, ID equal to row of 0, payload equal to row of 1, and created at equal to row of 2. Schedule 3 posts to be sent at different times. So the first payload is sent on 1st January 2022. So the payload is called January payload. The second one is sent on 1st February 2022, and the third is sent on 3rd March 2022. 1st March 2022, right. So with app.test client, where does this test client come from? We have an app, right? So do we have test client anywhere before? This is what we need to check. Okay, right. So run the scheduled posts at different times, which it's frozen at different times. So I need to query the posts at different times. And like you query it on 1st January, you query it on 15th of February and on 30th of March. So here there should be one entry, there should be two entries here, and there should be three entries here. So we defined a Flask app with two routes, one to accept post and insert the payload into a database, and another to query the data from the database. We defined three functions to schedule posts to the Flask endpoint at different times, January, February, and March. Finally, we queried the posts from the database at other times using the getPosts function in FreezeTime. So this shows us how we can query the database at different times to make sure that it's all correct. Postgres. If you want to use a Postgres SQL database, you can use this code instead. All of this code should be on my GitHub, so you can copy paste that as well. So here we are just using a different database, Postgres database, and we create a table to store the post, insert the payload. Everything else is literally the same except just the adding the creation of the database, the user password, and everything else. So now you want to write tests, right? So here is where when we write these functions that call post for January payload and like stuff like that, on 1st of January, if you do a /get post, the response should be 200 and the length should be 1. Similarly, on 15th of February, it should be 2, and on 30th of March, it should be 3. So that is what we should be asserting. Now we'll write a complete integration test using Python's unittest framework to call getPosts and posts method at different times. So there's this class integration test which takes in unittest.test case. There's a setup which happens before the test starts executing. So self.app is app.test client, self.connection is SQLite.connect example.db, and self.c self.connection.cosa. And after this is done, then there'll be a closure of the connection. So this is the main test. We froze the time at 1:1. So sure, everything else outside this will be frozen on 1st January 2022, and whenever it's inside this freeze time bit statement, then it should take in this time. So we just did the same thing, and it's the whole thing just written all together. You can copy paste this and run this in your local to see if this is working correctly as well. And you can also put in a lot more posts at different years, times, dates to make sure that it's all working correctly, and write a few more tests. So this test sets up the Flask app and database connection in setup method and tears them down in the tear down method. It defines a single test method that schedules 3 posts at different times and queries the database using the getPosts method at the same time. It uses the freeze time decorator to set the time to a specific value during each test case. It also uses the assert equal method to check that the response status code is finally 200 and that the number of posts returned is as expected. Finally, it runs the test using unittest.main. So all the code for this is available in this GitHub repository. You can run it directly from here. So let's talk about some best practices for using FreezeGun. Don't overuse FreezeGun. When FreezeGun can be extremely helpful in testing, it's essential to not overuse it. If you find yourself using FreezeGun frequently, it may be a sign that your code is too tightly coupled to time and could benefit from being refactored. Use the correct time zone. If your application needs to handle time zones, set the correct time zone when using FreezeGun. This will ensure that all your tests are accurate and your application behaves correctly. Keep time manipulation localized. When using FreezeGun, it is essential to keep time manipulation localized to the test where it is needed. Avoid modifying the system time out of tests, as this can have unexpected consequences and make it harder to reason about your code. Keep tests deterministic. When using FreezeGun, keep your tests deterministic. F means the results of your tests should be same each time they run. regardless of the system type. If your tests are non-deterministic, debugging and fixing issues can be difficult. Test edge cases. Be sure to test edge cases when using FreezeGun. For example, how your code handles leap years, daylight saving time changes, and other unusual circumstances. So this is a very important problem, this daylight saving time problem. We'll be coming to this in a later video. So this is the final conclusion. Manipulating time in Python can be challenging, but FreezeGun simplifies the process and enables developers to focus on testing their code. FreezeGun allows for a flexible and straightforward approach to manipulating time that can be useful for various testing scenarios, whether you're testing time-sensitive code, working with time zones, or need to simulate specific times. FreezeGun provides an excellent solution that saves time and reduces errors. So that's it for this article. Feel free to leave feedback and comments on the video. Make sure to like and subscribe if you really like this video and for more upcoming Python videos. Happy coding!